Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's last post ceremony. My name is Caris May, and joining us today from the Australian Army is Lieutenant Colonel Ash Worthington. Welcome. We warmly welcome the family of Private Francis Edward Dwyer, whose story will be read shortly. We are also honoured to acknowledge General Douglas Fraser and the accompanying members of the Capstone Group and delegates of the Defence, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Network Conference who are joining us for the ceremony today. We welcome veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that support them. We acknowledge the members of RSL and Services Clubs Association, RSL Victoria and RSL Queensland, who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony from around Australia. During the ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the pool of reflection by family and visitors and students on behalf of the following schools. From Queensland, All Saints Primary School from Albany Creek, and from Victoria, the Bacchus Marsh Primary School. To commence this evening's ceremony, I'd like to invite you all stand and join in singing the National Anthem. Boys and girls, you may now be seated. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn their loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as it's described at the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight, we read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the more than 102,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and other operations for over more than a century. But first, we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths and floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the pool of reflection.
Today we remember and pay tribute to Private Francis Edward Dwyer. Francis Dwyer was born on the 14th of October 1875, the second of 4 children born to Owen and Elizabeth Dwyer in Oberon, New South Wales. By 1900 he had moved to Geraldton, Western Australia, where he was working as a clerk. That April, Dwyer enlisted for service in South Africa with the 4th Imperial Bushmen. He embarked with his unit from Fremantle on the 8th of May, arriving in Port Elizabeth in June. During his time in South Africa, Dwyer's unit saw plenty of active service, which included the battles of Bethlehem, Renosterkop and Wittenbergen. He returned to Australia in July 1901 and was released from service in August. At the outbreak of the First World War, Dwyer was working as a clerk at Meekatharra. He travelled to Perth and on to Black Boy Hill Camp, where he enlisted in the newly formed 11th Battalion. Dwyer embarked from Fremantle in November aboard the transport ship Ascanius, and the following day the transport ship joined the first AIF convoy. The initial days of the voyage were filled with some excitement, especially when HMAS Sydney left her post and steamed off to intercept and destroy the German raider Emden. Further excitement followed after a stop at Colombo when Ascanius rammed the Shropshire in the early hours of the 21st of November, when the latter vessel stopped suddenly for what was thought to be a man overboard. The damage to both ships was found to be above the waterline, and both vessels were able to continue their journeys. The 11th Battalion spent some months in training in Egypt, after which they sailed for Lemnos in preparation for the Gallipoli campaign. Dwyer landed amongst the first wave of Australians ashore on Gallipoli in the pre-dawn hours of the 25th of April. His company came ashore near Aribuni and moved quickly inland. In the following weeks, the Australian line was consolidated, and in May, a large Turkish counterattack was bloodily repulsed. Dwyer was involved in holding the 11th Battalion's line at the head of Victoria Gully. Dwyer was killed in action on the 21st of June 1915. The manner of his death is unrecorded, but it is likely that he was a member of the 11th Battalion's covering force on the forward slope of Silt Spur as other members of the battalion dug new trenches. The covering force was subjected to Turkish rifle and machine gun fire, and Dwyer was killed during this time, the only fatal casualty for the battalion that night. He was 41 years old. He was initially buried in the 11th Battalion Cemetery in Victoria Gully, but was later moved to Browns Dip and, in 1923, to his final resting place in the Lone Pine Cemetery. Dwyer's name is listed on the Roll of Honour on my right, among more than 60,000 others from the First World War. His photograph is displayed today beside the pool of reflection. This is but one of the many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Private Francis Edward Dwyer, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
Could you all please stand for the ode and last post?
They shall not grow old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. In the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them. Lest we forget.
We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man, lying out there upon the air, or in the low scrub at Gallipoli, with his poor tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes this evening's last post ceremony. We would like to thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial today, and we wish you all a very good evening. Thank you.